All right, very good. So today's lectionary text, one of them is Jeremiah 29, 1, 4 through 7. You probably recognize some of these verses. In fact, the second sermon I ever preached at University Baptist Fort Worth was this text. And I preached way too long, so you should worry. Actually, my first sermon was way too short. It was in San Antonio, it was like 10 minutes. I had nothing else to say. And then my second one was like uber long because I'd been to seminary for a semester and I had things to tell people. Did you grow up using this phrase, a long haul, or have your grandparents use that phrase, long haul? We know long haul truckers. I was curious where the phrase came from. Anybody have any idea? Long haul?
Long haul is across country.
What's that?
From long haul, literally across country.
Yeah. So it was westward expansion of the U.S. Think Conestoga wagons and carrying all your goods and possessions, and that's where that phrase. And then, of course, it became a metaphor for any kind of human experience that is rigorous, it's demanding, it requires endurance, it's not short, it's long-lived, and so all the things we pray about or many times are long haul, like we're all living through long haul experiences, and we'll talk some more about that a little bit later. The long haul I'm referencing here, of course, is the exile, right? It's the period of the exile for the Israelites when they were carried off into Babylonia for kind of a rounded term. We'll talk about it, 70 years or so that was prophesied for them while they were living in exile. But let's begin by listening to the text this morning, and then we'll come back and talk a little bit more about ways we can read this text. So who would read 29, 1, and then skip 2 and 3 because the lectionary leaves it out, and then 4 through 7? Any volunteers? Okay, Cindy?
These are the words of the letter that Jeremiah the prophet sent from Jerusalem to the surviving elders of the exiles, and to the priests, the prophets, and all the people whom Nebuchadnezzar had taken into exile from Jerusalem to Babylon. Thus says the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, to all the exiles whom I have sent into exile from Jerusalem to Babylon: build houses and live in them, plant gardens and eat their produce, take wives and have sons and daughters, take wives for your sons and give your daughters in marriage, that they may bear sons and daughters. Multiply there and do not decrease, but seek the welfare of the city where I have sent you into exile, and pray to the Lord on its behalf, for in its welfare you will find your welfare.
Wonderful, thank you. So at face value, I think these words are relatively simple, but I think the implications of what Jeremiah is saying here are incredibly profound for a number of different reasons. And I've said this before, but when we look at a text like this, as interpreters, there's always at least 3 or more ways we can look at it, right? We can look at it historically, like what happened historically to the Jews, what's the significance to the history of Israel, what's the significance to the history of God's progressive revelation in the world. We can look at it ethically, right? What is God telling them to do in this particular circumstance? And there's very specific kind of behavioral, and that's the ethical part of it, right? And then we try to think, well, how is this situation relevant to some context I live in? And are any of these ethical teachings relevant for me and the same kind of long haul exile experiences I have? And then finally, we can think of these texts theologically, right? Theologically say, well, what does this tell us about the nature of God? What does this tell us about how God works in the world? What does this tell us about the themes of grace and redemption and the other kind of theological themes? So anytime I look at a text like this, we could spend all day on any one aspect of this, but let's begin with the historical a little bit first. What comes to mind when you think of this period of history? When I tell you about, well, this is the exile of the Jewish people, what comes to mind?
They're not living in a place that they want to be. They've been moved out of their homes.
Okay, they're living in a place where they don't want to be. They've been moved out of their homes, right? There's been a mass deportation, or more to the point, multiple waves of deportations by a foreign occupier, okay? All right, what else do you think about?
Well, they had to completely restructure how they worshiped, what it meant to worship Yahweh. The Holy of Holies was in Jerusalem. They weren't able to get there.
Yeah.
So it's when we see the temples or the synagogues system develop, so that they've got the diaspora much more dispersed.
Yeah, so yeah, you just unpacked a lot right there in a few sentences, but yeah, I mean, one of the great ironies, or you could say redemptive activities, in the midst of this horrific upheaval of culture and society and national identity and religious identity and faith challenge, all that kind of stuff, results in one of the most creative, productive, prolific periods of Jewish history. And that in itself is a profound idea that we should always keep in mind, right? Because to your point, we know that by the end of the period, several things had happened. Because of the destruction of the temple rituals and temple sort of life, they're no longer accessible to them. So they had to develop kind of these centers of Jewish learning, which eventually become synagogues. Remember, there was no synagogue system. There was no congregational system up until this time. There was just the temple, and you had annual religious ceremonies and rituals, and you trekked up. Just as recently, Jews to Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, all of these holidays, they were all temple-based holidays. With the exile, they became very localized, very family-oriented to this very day, very synagogue-oriented. They began building ritual baths, right? Because they didn't have the temple anymore. And so the rituals of cleanliness and preparation, they began to build these architectural structures. To this day, you can still find them, these baths. They began to flourish in lots of different ways. So it's really interesting to remember the exile period, which was incredibly destructive and disruptive. Jeremiah prophesied that actually what God wanted them to do was to be creative and productive. And if they ultimately were, which was profound. Yes, sir.
I never thought about this before, but before this period, was the common Jewish person not particularly literate of the Pentateuch, of the scriptures?
Well, they weren't literate at all. I mean, all the way into the first century. I mean, you're dealing with very low literacy rate of the culture, like well into the second, third, fourth centuries of history. So they were completely reliant upon the priests to interpret everything for them. But they did start during this period, part of the synagogue life and rabbinic Judaism starts to emerge as they became seats of learning. And so they began to educate the people from the ancient texts that they had. It was still, you sit at the feet and somebody talks like this. You couldn't read it. They couldn't read the text, right? But education began to multiply in ways that it never had before.
Well, and Brad, wasn't there, when there have been more texts, they had to duplicate, right? So more things were written down? Or was that earlier?
Well, yeah, I mean, they had to, you had to produce more copies of the scrolls, right? So the scribal task and, the scribal community begins to grow, and there are groups of scribes centered around certain prophets, right? And, Jeremiah is sending letters, which are written documents. Today's text is a letter, and it was sent by these two characters in verse 2 and 3 that we didn't read about. But they had already been established as emissaries to Nebuchadnezzar by Jehoiakim, who was kind of like a Donald Trump Jr., by the way. He was Jehoiakim II, and he was an utter failure. All right. But so there was more written documents were being created, but and of course Ezekiel is prophesying from within the exile. So, and he's trying to encourage them. So that's why, Jeremiah, Lamentations, Ezekiel, all grouped together in the Old Testament, right? All right, so just a couple of the major points. So we know that generally, historically, this is supposed to be a 70-year period, although the beginning and end points are fuzzy. We do have these historic dates that we know for sure. We know when the destruction of the temple was in 586. There was a lot of destruction going on before that. There were a lot of waves of deportations. We know that Nebuchadnezzar's strategy was first, the Jews recorded as 10,000 leaders, because they have their own history away of how they know it's 10,000, I don't know, but 10,000, former kings, royalty, elders, priests, artisans, like whoever were leaders, they got deported first, and they left all the workers in the land, presumably because they could keep producing, and then they could pay the tax, right, the vassal tax. But increasingly, the workers that stayed, they were rebellious. And part of Jeremiah's thing is, you guys need to just chill, right? If you keep doing this, we're going to lose everything. That's part of the tone of Jeremiah. And he's criticizing the kings so much so that the kings want to come and kill him in these earlier chapters, because he's saying, you guys, this is not what God wants. You know, it's your fault that this is happening, and now you're rebelling, and we're gonna lose everything if you keep doing this. And they said, no, because God's on our side. You know, we call it the inviolability of Israel, right? We're the covenant people of God. Nobody could, you know, mess with us. And it's like, oh, brother, you just don't even understand, right? And so this letter goes to these initial 10,000 leaders. In the opening part of this passage, it said that he sent it to the leaders and the exiles, and even the king and queen are there, but curiously, they're not really mentioned by name there. Now, the other bookend date is what we call the Cyrus Decree. You may remember that Cyrus or Cyrus, king of Persia, the Persians conquered the Babylonians about 70 years later. They were very warm and positive to the Israelite people. And eventually there's a very famous document, which we well know in history, called the Cyrus Decree, where Cyrus the Great says, okay, all you Jews can go back. And even in Isaiah, we have references to the Cyrus, that he is God's anointed. He is a secular power, right, that the Jews historically believe God acted and spoke through. Keep that in mind, because one of the themes in Jeremiah is God is far bigger than you can even imagine. God uses a much wider group of people than you think. God is not regional. God is not geographic. God is universal. And in fact, God's people are even protected by the actions of people that don't know God. And God's people and God's purposes are furthered by people that don't know that they're actually cooperating with God. I mean, this is a really big liberal view of how God works in the world. And it starts to emerge here. You think you're going to a foreign land where God is not. God's there. You think you are being oppressed by an oppressor who is in opposition to God. No, God's actually working through the oppressor, and you need to learn to work. It's a very challenging word. It's a very challenging word. We'll come back to the specific words. So roughly 70 years, loosely before the destruction of the temple, loosely after the Cyrus Decree, they do come back and they start restoring the land. Very quickly, Jewish historians describe 4 periods of exile. One of the things it means to be a Jew is to be a nomadic people, right? Jews think of themselves culturally as wanderers, and they think about the Egyptian captivity first, which was not an exile because they didn't have anything before, but they were dominated by a power, right, as slaves. And so they think that's kind of the prototype of exile. And then this exile, right, when they've had their kingdoms and the northern kingdom fell and the southern kingdom fell and they're carried off into captivity and everything that they knew and loved was destroyed. Then they think of the Greek period as an exile period, but they still rebuilt their temples and they had all that kind of stuff, but they think of it as a cultural captivity, right? That Greek culture began to dominate Judaism and corrupt Judaism. And so then there were these reform movements to pull the Jews away from Greek culture. And then of course we had the Roman period, which is also, they considered exile, which ultimately resulted in the destruction of the Jerusalem temple finally and for all, and a bigger diaspora and the spreading out. And that also includes like the Crusades. They consider that part of the Roman exile, the Crusades that also killed a lot of Jews. They think of the pogroms. You know what that is? Say it again. Pogroms, yeah. The pogroms of Eastern Europe and the Ukrainian, and there's I read it in a 3-year period from 1918 to 1921, there were 100,000 Jews were killed just in that one region. Ukraine, Poland, Russian, and that became the precursor to the Holocaust. So to be a Jewish person is to be greatly shaped by exile, by this experience, which I think is even more ironic today when we look at what's going on in the Middle East. And we're talking about the state of Israel trying to exile the Palestinians. It's like, you of all people should know, right? But psychologically, people who study power dynamics know that oftentimes the oppressed internalize the oppressor, right? And they don't even realize that they have become like those that they hate, right? You're not, right? And this is like such a vivid example of the oppressed becoming the oppressor, and they can't see it, right? Because it's coming from deep within them, and it's self-justified in a kind of rationalization, you know, because I'm a victim, I get to do this, you know, it's like, in God's economy, we're all perpetrators and victims, right? Yes, sir.
This may be a little off topic, but where did the idea originate that Jews were God's chosen people?
Oh, from the very beginning, when God enters into a covenant, the Abrahamic covenant, right? All the covenants that God initiates, for I have chosen you.
Forgive me, but if I wanted to say that Trump followers, MAGA people, are God's chosen people, I could say, God told me that they're our chosen people.
You could say that. We wouldn't believe you, but
I
you can
don't-
say that.
Well, some people say that, you know.
Right.
But what has always bothered me is the way that the Jewish scripture attributes, every time something happens that's in their favor, it's God's will, that we won that battle, we destroyed that city. And it's so easy to say, once you've achieved, even though it may be a harmful act, that God willed it, and I just,
Yeah, no, I hear what you're saying. It all boils down to faith, right? Do you accept the scriptures as true and reliable or not? Orthodox Christianity
Not some of
says,
them.
well, that's fine. I'm just kind of
I finally have
explaining.
someone else who agrees with me in this class, thank you.
That's fine. I'm just explaining how we arrive at this position. I'm not,
Yeah,
we're all free, but
and I'm not, excuse me, forgive me, I'm not quarreling with what you're saying, I'm just curious, because, you know, and I wonder what Jeremiah's politics were. What motivated Jeremiah, you know, to say, be fruitful and multiply, that's God's will, you know?
Right.
We've heard that as Christians, and therefore, it's one of the motivating factors behind the church's rejection of gay people, in my opinion, because a lot of them, in the beginning of the movement, did not want to be fruitful and multiply. And,
well, yeah, I think we're getting off to
I know.
another area. But no, I mean, you raise a valid point. Any faith claim, right, can be criticized is not from God. I think you're saying, well, what if it wasn't from God, right? Any faith claim can be challenged that way, and people like us decide whether these faith claims in the Old Testament have validity for us, and that this plays a role. And for me, I do think that these are acceptable faith claims. We often have to reinterpret them because God's revelation is progressive over time. But I take it at face value that God entered into a very special covenant with the ancient Semitic people we call Israelites, and that was a special promise. Now, what that means today, that's a whole other conversation. And just to be clear, when Netanyahu stands and speaks, he's speaking as the leader of a state government, not as a speaker for all Jewish people, and he's not, in fact, if you even listen to him talk, I've listened to his speeches on traditional Jewish holidays, and they're purely historical. Like they have nothing ethical or theological to them. They're just historically, this is what we believe. So let's kind of circle back to the troops a little bit. So historically, that's the experience of the exile, the 70 years they were there, the challenge of all this disruption, and how does God want us to behave while we're there, and where is God? These are the big theological questions, right? Before we move on very quickly, I want us to talk a little bit about how can we view exile then as a metaphor for our experience? Like, in what way can we legitimately say, I'm living through an exile, or I feel exiled, or for some of us it's really hard, I think, because we haven't been exiled very much.
Let's look at the people in this country that are being, the immigrants, for example, okay? A lot of those people are Christians, okay? We claim to be Christians. We're doing horrible things to them. I wonder how they would write their chapter during this time. And whether they would, I wonder in the context of what's going on. Because all faith is political. All religion is political, not faith.
I would totally agree with you. I just want to touch on this because I think this is really important. Exile is an experience of displacement, right? A loss of connection, a loss of power, right? And so when you think of immigrants, they're experiencing exile on multiple levels, right? In one sense, even if they willfully came here, they are experiencing exile from their home culture and their home place. Simultaneously, they are exiled within American culture because they're treated as less than and other. So there's layers of it, right?
So to answer your question, probably many in the room have moved to another city, another state for a job. You've left behind family, your church, your community. You're starting over, and I would sense that's probably a feeling of exile, like, where am I? How am I gonna recreate my social and cultural fabric that I had back in Texas or Oklahoma, where it was? And it may take a long time to get replanted, you know, a new job, new friends, new neighborhood, new all this.
Yeah, no, any kind of, like, yeah, geographic dislocation, cultural dislocation.
Yeah, I'm just gonna tag on what you're saying. Over 300,000 Black women have lost jobs during this period. I mean, that, to me, that's an exile.
That is an exile, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, you could say, to be a woman is to be an exile.
Yes.
You know, for generations dominated by the patriarchy, right? To be a person of color, like you've had to navigate in this country, you know, against all kinds of forces that you didn't have control over, right? If you have a chronic illness, right, you can feel exiled from your own body, from healthy society, because you're just trapped in this experience that it's unwanted, right? And you're struggling and you're having to figure out, what do I do in response to this?
Mental illness.
Mental illness, any profound loss, right, you know, raises the question of where is God at work in my life and how do I even go on with my life and those kinds of things. So I think exile is, when this term was first introduced to me as like a metaphor for human experience, I was actually in seminary and we had a big retreat with the National Conference of Christians and Jews. So you had a bunch of Jewish seminarians and a bunch of Protestant seminarians from other places, and we were talking about exile. And of course, the Jewish students could talk from a very rich tradition, you know, and we were thinking about it. But of course, that was during the time of the fundamentalist takeover of the Southern Baptist Convention. And all of us who were not that, regardless of what label we went by then, whether it was we were just a moderate, you know, we used to call ourselves, it's like that ship sailed a long time ago, right? Or we're progressive, or we're liberal, or whatever we are. Right, our terms have evolved as our experience of exile has drawn on now for 40, 50 years. They were like, that's exactly what we're living through, being exiled by our own people.
Yeah.
And speaking of the women, battered women have to be exiled. They are the victim, and they are the ones that have to move.
Yeah.
And not only do they have to move, but they have to hide.
Yes.
And they have to pull their children out of school, and they have to not speak to their family, and they have to rebuild, and most shelters give them 30 days to recreate their life. They have to find a new job. It's horrific.
Yeah, I mean, we are living through a tremendous, I'm glad you brought up all the Black women have lost their jobs. During the shutdown, 4,000 this week of people are getting furloughed. They're getting fired.
Right.
And we're gonna see waves of this, of just people, we've already seen federal employees of 30 years, CDC people, right, at the top of their field, completely dislocated.
Well, there's two parts. I think when you're getting exiled, and you're moved, you know, you're exiled to Babylonia, you're exiled from your job, it also lets you know there's a whole other world, especially for people like most of us who have a life of, those of us who have a life of privilege. But now my religious rights are being impinged, my constitutional rights are being impinged, and it kind of is there to wake you up to what else is, and God forbid I should say woke, that there's a big world out there that maybe you've been ignoring. And the other thing about this passage is basically God is telling the Israelites, you're exiled, you kind of need to deal with it. Get on with your life. Pray for your oppressors, basically. Pray for this nation that's oppressing you, which is what we did earlier today.
Yeah, but not necessarily a welcome word
No.
in the midst of grief and loss. But we want to make sure we talk about this. Were you gonna say something?
What caught me, you said back to when the diaspora happened, it was the greatest period of creativity and productivity that the Jewish people were forced into. And that got me thinking, similar to what you're saying, where can we begin to be creative? And where can we begin to be productive in new ways that transcend this whole us, them, left, right, male, female, I mean, all the other.
Yeah.
How can we even find a way to come beyond the dichotomy?
Yeah, I think that's the paradigm shifting vision that Jeremiah brings to the exiles, which I suspect was not welcome in the beginning, right? In my human experience, these kinds of challenges are not welcome when we've so, divided the world up into these binary things. Let's listen to the words again, specifically the text. So after that introductory stuff, build houses and live in them, plant gardens and eat what they produce, take wives and have sons and daughters, take wives for your sons and give your daughters in marriage, that they may bear sons and daughters, multiply there and do not decrease. So of all of the things that God could have asked them to do, right, why this? Why this very concrete, specific, build a house and live in it, right? Plant a garden and eat that food, right? Go on with family life, and this is going to go on for multiple generations. So do all of the things you would do, like finding wives, and your grandkids are going to be born in exile, by the way, but this is God's will for you. Like what is the ethical weight of that?
Or a question to that point. They were a nomadic group, right? The Jews at this point.
Well, no, they had been a settled group.
But they're been moved.
Now they have been moved to Babylon.
And they're saying, put your home here.
Yeah.
They're saying, put your home here. Rather than looking back, put your home here.
Yeah, see, that's when you think about what were the other emotional, psychological options available to them?
Well, I'm thinking that, you can choose, I'm gonna be depressed, I'm gonna be rebellious and burn down things and have a fit. Because the Jews were known to be complainers, like when they got the manna, well, what?
Yeah. Let's go back to Egypt.
But a new house, a new child, a new marriage, all those things are things of joy and to be celebrated.
Yeah.
So maybe God is telling them, it's not where you are. My mother always said this, it's not where you are, it's who you're with. That is what it's important.
Yeah, so it's really interesting here. I think Vanessa just left, but therapists love to tell you to reframe this experience, right? Change your way of looking at and analyzing this, describing meaning to what's going on, because maybe there's meaning that you're missing, right? And so Jeremiah, God through Jeremiah, and I believe God is speaking through Jeremiah, that he's saying, okay, you're my beloved people. I want you to reframe. This has been a trauma. This has been horrible, but I want to turn your eyes not back, as Scott said, not back, but forward, right? And be a productive people. Be a creative people, right? Do the things that matter. Have a home, have a family, take care of yourself, plant food, right? Lead a responsible life. And so if you think about what would it require of them, they would have to accept the divine strategy, right? Okay, God, I accept that this is your plan and you're going to bring us back, but this is what you want for us, and you have to accept it or not. I want a t-shirt for everybody in the world that said acceptance is a wonderful virtue. Because so oftentimes, we are such an anxious, depressed, angry, upset, and bitter people because we haven't learned in some situations to just practice acceptance. Now, I know how that can be used as a club against people, right? To silence dissent. And we have to be careful with this, because a text like this can get co-opted by an oppressor, right? And they can say, look, you should just settle down, go along with the king, do what you're told, right? In fact, we have leaders today that take Romans 13 and they do the very thing with the New Testament, right? Submit to the authorities because God put them in place, right?
It's radically different when that's being said from the outside rather than the inside.
Yeah, exactly, and that's the distinction I want to make. He's saying it from the inside, out of their own tradition, according to God's plan, and he's not speaking politically, right? He's speaking spiritually and theologically and ethically, so that's a good point to make.
There's also a cultural piece here that we need to think about today, is that they, God told them that they were his chosen people. Well, if you've been told you're your chosen people, you think you are special. I think if you look around our class, our country today, in America, a lot of us think we're special. We think, look, we've got a democracy here, we're the big guy on the block, and I think the Christian right particularly is going in that direction. And when you feel you're special, then you whine a lot, and you rebel a lot, and you fight. And he's telling them, don't fight. And
He's
maybe
also
telling
coming off
them
of- he's
they're
not
not-
been a happy prophet.
no.
He's not.
We're reading the second chapter of his life, where after he's been beating up their people for not being faithful, and I said, well, this is where it got you, but there's a different road out.
Yeah. Calm down, settle in. I love that insurance commercial nationwide about Saquon Barkley. Yeah, I'm stay calm, Barkley. And he's all zen, everybody around him, just like motivating man. It's that same kind of look. You could whine and complain and be angry for 70 years, and you could be fighting like the resistance against Nebuchadnezzar, but that is not going to fulfill God's purposes for you, and it's not going to help you experience more of God.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
Were they, being made slaves now? Or why did they get moved out? Like, what was the Babylon's reason for getting them? Was it to lessen that maybe military threat?
Yeah, I mean, it's like all politics,
two
it's money and
counties
power,
over?
right? So they wanted their stuff. The first thing they did, they stole all the gold out of the temple and the golden articles and everything. And then they wanted them to pay a tax, and they didn't want to pay a tax, right? And so they wanted the productivity, they wanted the money, they wanted Assyrians did it, the Babylonians did it, the Persians did it, the Greeks did it, the Romans did it. It's like, it's human history. Right? But so they were a slave people. To what degree did they have walking around freedom versus, working the fields for somebody kind of freedom? It varied widely, but they were a vanquished people that had no power or control in the land that they were taken to. I want to close with a couple of big ideas. So one of the radical things about this experience is that what I said in the very beginning is that God is telling them that God will be active in their lives. I will be with you in this place, right? And I will sustain you. This is part of my plan, and I will bring you back again. And then he gives this command, which suggests a lot to us about God. God is not vindictive. God is not revengeful. God is redemptive, right? God is sovereign. God is not limited to the geography of Israel. God is the universal God of all. God works they shouldn't just directly wait for God to intervene and do something, but they should live ethical lives and realize that their fate is actually tied to the fate of the Babylonians themselves, which is a radical idea, and that they should pray for them, which is, we can spend a lot of time with that. Why did God want them to pray for the enemy? Well, fast forward to Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount, right? Praying for the enemy is the only way that everybody gets redeemed. And it's against human nature, because human nature is revengeful and vindictive, right? Do we have leaders that encourage us to pray for one another or who are vindictive? Sorry. Now, this final, and so that shades into this pray for the welfare of the city that you're in. Now, we can interpret this a couple different ways. Maybe it's cynically, we could say, well, this is just enlightened self-interest, right? People who learn to survive behind enemy lines, they know how to sweet talk the enemy, right? And get the stuff that they need, and no one faults them morally for it because they're being oppressed, and shrewd people learn to navigate. You could think of it that way, right? And if you've ever been in those kinds of positions, you know that you learn to work underneath the surface and around the powers that be to get stuff done, right? But I'm not sure God is just giving them a simple encouragement to be shrewd and to manipulate the Babylonians to get what you need. I think, based upon the fuller teaching of Scripture, he's genuinely saying there's a mysterious way that somehow all of our fates are bound together. And the best way to deal with an oppressor is to want what's best for them. It's not an endorsement of their oppression, but it's to want human flourishing for everyone. Like that's the moral high ground. You know, as Michelle famously said, when they go low, we go lower? No. There's a trend now where everybody's saying, we're not going high anymore. We're going to go as low as they go, right? And we're having to deal with that as a nation. You know, there's this big fight fire with fire thing going on now, which pushback is great, but you can't lose your soul in the process, right? If you're following me. So anyway, they're admonished to pray for the welfare of the city because all of their fates are tangled up together. On a lighter note, I'm going to close with this. You may find this completely irrelevant, but I don't. I've been enjoying a musical artist recently named Jason Isbell. Anybody know Jason Isbell? Okay, he's a folk country artist, won a couple of Grammys. He's actually one of the unique animals in the forest. He is a left-leaning country artist who played at some of Kamala's events and caught a lot of flack for it. But this isn't politicized at all. He's an incredible songwriter. But just listen to this, because I hear some echoes of some of this text in this very simple kind of folk country lyrics. And by the way, there's a couple of profane words in here that I'm going to soften a little bit. I think you'll figure out what they are. So the title of the song is Don't Be Tough Until You Have To. Don't be tough until you have to. Take your heartbreak on the chin. Don't forget the crap you went through. Throw your caution to the wind. Tighten up your belts and laces. Feel the pain and feel it pass. Don't be tough until you have to. Let love knock you on your... Don't be crappy to the waiter. He's had a harder day than you. Don't make babies stay up later just because they're so damn cute. Don't say love unless you mean it. But don't say sorry unless you're wrong. Tell a story like you've seen it. Tell yourself that you belong. Don't be tough until you have to. Take your heartbreak on the chin. Don't forget that you went through. Throw your caution to the wind. And if you get to feeling lonely, read out loud. If you can read, take a nap. If you get sleepy, if you're hungry, try to eat. If you want it, go and get it. Don't just pray and wait around. Life will kill you if you let it. So when you're down, then say you're down. Don't be tough until you have to. Take your heartbreak on the chin. Don't forget that you went through, but throw your caution to the wind. I think that's the same kind of encouragement that Jeremiah is giving them, right? Just own the experience, own the loss, get to work, be honest, and keep believing that love wins and love will prevail. Amen. Let it be. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Nicely done.
Jason Isabel played